Another mystery buried deep in the hills of eastern Washington keeps resurfacing. A bottomless pit said to be a pathway to the paranormal. KOMO4's Denise Whitaker heads east in search of the hole.
In 1997, a man called a late-night radio show with an impossible story. A bottomless hole on his Washington property that swallowed sound itself. What started as a strange tale became an internet obsession, leading to government cover-ups, vanishing expeditions, and footage of something in the depths that wasn't supposed to exist.
I do wonder if it's government property, though, because if it's a mine shaft, can you just own mine shafts on your property?
What those recordings captured changed how the story was viewed forever. The call that changed everything. It started with a voice on late-night radio, February 21st, 1997. Coast to Coast AM, where insomniacs and curiosity seekers gather to hear about UFOs, cryptids, and government conspiracies. Art Bell was hosting when a caller identifying himself as Mel Waters came on the line.
Late-night radio kingpin Art Bell, who started his career at a Las Vegas radio station before he became an international star.
His voice was calm, measured, almost too casual for what he was about to describe. Mel wasn't calling to scare anyone. He wasn't trying to get famous or sell a book. He just wanted to talk about the land he owned near Ellensburg, Washington. Land with a problem. There was a hole on his property. Not a normal hole, not a sinkhole, or an old mine shaft. This was different in ways that defied explanation. The hole sat on a remote corner of his 9-acre property, partially hidden by brush and trees. Mel said he'd been dropping fishing line into it for weeks, trying to find the bottom.
Mel's Hole is a complex, very interesting mystery.
He used 80-pound test line, the kind deep-sea fishermen use for marlins and sharks. He tied on weights, lowered them carefully, and watched the line disappear into darkness. 15 miles. That's how far he claimed the line went before he gave up. Over 80,000 feet straight down. Never hit bottom. Never felt resistance. Never made a sound. He wasn't the first to use it either. Locals had known about the hole for decades. They'd been using it as a convenient dump site since at least the 1960s. Old refrigerators, washing machines, trash, construction debris. Some ranchers even admitted to disposing of dead livestock there. Cattle, horses, sheep. Everything went down silent. No thud, no echo, no splash. Just nothing. The hole swallowed sound itself, leaving only an empty quiet that felt wrong in your chest. But the silence was just the beginning. Dogs wouldn't go near it. Mel owned 2 German shepherds who loved exploring the property, but they'd stop 20 feet from the opening and refuse to go further.
Showed 2 whited out blocks covering areas including the reported location of Mel's property.
They'd whine, pull at their leashes, and look back with something close to panic in their eyes. Birds refused to fly over it. Crows and hawks would alter their flight paths mid-air, curving around the spot like there was an invisible barrier. The air around the opening felt different too. Thick, dense, like trying to breathe through a wet cloth. Mel said it felt like the atmosphere was holding its breath, waiting for something that never came. He tried measuring it with homemade tools. Heavy rocks attached to rope, weighted chains, metal bars, even an old car battery once. Nothing worked. The hole was too deep to measure with anything he had. Every attempt ended the same way. Miles of line disappearing into darkness, and that same unsettling feeling creeping up his spine. Like something down there was watching him work. Native American groups in the area had known about the spot for generations. The Yakima people had names for the land. Warnings passed down through stories told around winter fires. They said the ground was cursed, but not in the way Hollywood portrays curses. It wasn't haunted by ghosts or prowled by monsters. It was wrong in a fundamental way, wrong in a manner that went deeper than folklore or superstition. The hole wasn't supposed to exist. Their stories suggested it was a doorway, a threshold to somewhere humans weren't meant to go. A place where the natural order had been violated, where reality itself bent in ways that made the elders speak in hushed tones and warn children to stay away. Then the call ended. Mel thanked Art Bell and hung up. But years later, someone found those coordinates, and the world learned Mel wasn't lying about what he saw. When science says impossible, the experts moved fast. As soon as Mel's story spread beyond the coast-to-coast AM audience and into geology departments and physics forums, scientists lined up to debunk it. Their message was unanimous. A hole like that can't exist. Physics won't allow it. The Earth's crust won't support it. Dr. Gerald Simmons, a geophysicist from MIT, who'd spent 30 years studying crustal formations, was one of the first to go on record. He explained it simply. The deeper you go underground, the hotter it gets. On average, temperature increases by about 25 degrees Celsius for every kilometer you descend. That's the geothermal gradient, measured and verified in boreholes across every continent. But heat is just the beginning. Rock doesn't just sit still at those depths. The pressure becomes astronomical. Minerals compressed for millions of years start behaving differently. They flow like cold honey. They deform. They seal any cavity that tries to form. A natural void extending 15 miles straight down would collapse under its own weight within hours. If we look at the Kola super deep borehole in Russia, it is the deepest hole ever drilled by humans. Soviet scientists started that project in 1970 on the Kola Peninsula. They worked in shifts around the clock for 24 years, using the most advanced drilling technology available. They never made it to their goal. At 7.6 miles, they had to stop. The temperature at that depth reached 180 degrees Celsius. Their drill bits couldn't handle it. The rock became plastic, almost fluid. It would close behind the drill bit like a wound trying to heal. Yet Mel claimed he dropped 15 miles of fishing line into a hole in his backyard using nothing but a pulley and rope. No industrial drill, no cooling system, no engineering team. Just a garden hole that somehow went twice as deep as humanity's greatest drilling achievement. When geologists heard this, they laughed. But if the science was so clear, why didn't the government just ignore it? That's where the story stops being about science and starts being about silence. Mel said that within weeks of his first radio appearance, things changed. Unmarked cars started appearing on the dirt road leading to his property. White sedans with government plates that would slow down near his driveway, pause, then continue on. He'd find fresh tire tracks in places where no one should have been driving. Boot prints from heavy shoes pressed into the soft earth near the hole. Then one afternoon in late March 1997, he came home from town to find his land completely sealed off. Orange cones lined the access road. Sawhorses blocked his driveway. Men in yellow hazmat suits walked the perimeter carrying clipboards and equipment he didn't recognize. When Mel tried to walk onto his own property, two men in dark suits stopped him. They were polite but firm. There had been a plane crash nearby, they said. Possible contamination. Restricted access for safety reasons. But Mel didn't see wreckage. No emergency vehicles. No news helicopters. Just men with badges telling him to stay away. Then came the offer. $25,000 a year. Paid quietly, if he'd leave the country and never speak about the hole again. They made it clear, if he refused, they'd found evidence of an illegal methamphetamine lab on his property. Charges that could put him away for 20 years. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Mel took the deal. He flew to Australia. No trial, no headlines, just gone. But absence only makes mysteries grow louder. And when Mel returned years later, he brought back stories far darker than the first. The man who came back wrong. 5 years after vanishing to Australia, Mel Waters called Coast to Coast AM again. Same show, same host. But the moment he spoke, listeners knew something had changed. His voice sounded flatter, slower, like someone reading from a script they didn't fully understand. Art Bell noticed it immediately. He asked Mel simple questions about his time in Australia. Which city had he lived in? What had he done for work? Mel's answers were vague, contradictory. He said Perth, then Sydney, then corrected himself to Brisbane. He mentioned working construction, then changed it to consulting, then trailed off entirely. He said there were gaps in his memory, not small ones, entire months missing from his recollection. He'd find receipts in his wallet from restaurants he didn't remember visiting, photos on his camera showing him in places he had no memory of being. Once, he woke up in a hotel room in Darwin, over 2,000 miles from where he'd gone to sleep in Melbourne, with no explanation for how he got there. The physical changes were worse. Strange scars crisscrossed his torso, thin surgical lines that hadn't been there before. One ran from his sternum to his navel, precise and professional. Another traced along his rib cage. He had no memory of any surgery, no hospital records, no discharge papers. When he asked Australian doctors to examine them, they refused to speculate. One doctor quietly suggested he stop asking questions. There were injection marks, too. Small, circular scars on his arms and legs that formed patterns, almost geometric arrangements. Mel counted 17 of them. He had them tested for toxins, heavy metals, anything that might explain the memory loss. The results came back inconclusive. But one lab tech mentioned off the record that the tissue samples showed cellular damage consistent with repeated exposure to high-intensity electromagnetic fields. He talked about waking up groggy, with IV marks in his arm, finding bandages on his body he couldn't recall applying. Once, he came to consciousness strapped to a chair in a windowless room with bright lights, though he has no memory of what happened there or how long it lasted. The next thing he knew, he was back in his apartment with 3 days unaccounted for. Friends he remembered having in Perth stopped answering his calls. When he went to their addresses, he found empty apartments or new tenants who'd never heard of them. Employment records from jobs he distinctly remembered working vanished from company databases. It was as if pieces of his existence had been systematically erased. But he still believed what he said. He still insisted the whole was real. And now, he said, there was a second one. This time in Nevada, hidden deep in the desert near Tonopah, even more heavily guarded than the first. Mel claimed he'd been taken there, though whether by force or coercion, he couldn't clearly remember. He wouldn't go into full detail on the call, but he hinted at things that went far beyond simple geology. He talked about objects retrieved from the Nevada hole that shouldn't exist according to current understanding of history. Structures that predated known civilization by thousands of years. Materials that didn't match any element on the periodic table. And something else. Something alive. He described experiments conducted in underground facilities, tests run on whatever had been found in the depths. He spoke carefully, choosing his words like someone navigating a minefield. The message was clear. Whatever was in that second hole, it wasn't just deep. It was dangerous, and it was aware. He mentioned one other thing before the call ended. He said there might be a third hole, somewhere outside the United States, in a location he couldn't or wouldn't name. He suggested that what had been found in Washington and Nevada was just the beginning of something much larger, much older, and far more widespread than anyone suspected. Then the call ended abruptly. Mel thanked Art Bell and hung up. He disappeared again, this time for good. Then the internet woke up, and a whole new generation started asking questions no one in power wanted answered. The coordinates that shouldn't exist. For years, Mel's story stayed buried in old forum threads and late-night radio archives. Then in 2019, something changed. A user named DepthWalker33 appeared on a paranormal investigation board with a single post. We found it. Attached were satellite images and GPS coordinates. The metadata showed they'd been captured in late 2018. The location was listed as near Manastash Ridge, Washington, roughly 40 miles northwest of Ellensburg in the Cascade foothills where Mel claimed his property had been. The images showed dense forest for miles, ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, thick underbrush. But right in the center of one frame, there was an anomaly, a perfectly circular clearing, roughly 60 feet in diameter, completely devoid of vegetation. No trees, no grass, no shrubs, not even moss or lichen. What made it stranger was the texture. When users zoomed in and adjusted the contrast, the clearing didn't look like bare earth. It looked absent, like the ground itself had been removed. No shadows cast across it, despite the afternoon sun angle visible in surrounding areas. No natural features, just a void that satellite imaging seemed unable to properly render. Within hours, amateur cartographers cross-referenced the coordinates with Mel's vague descriptions from his 1997 call. He'd mentioned being about 8 miles from Ellensburg, near an old logging road that hadn't been used since the 1980s. He'd described a ridge to the east and a seasonal creek to the west. The coordinates matched, not perfectly, but close enough to be unsettling. Then users noticed something that made the discussion explode. Someone pulled up the same coordinates on Google Earth. The area was blurred, not just pixelated, but deliberately obscured with the same techniques used to hide military installations. It hadn't been that way in 2016. The censorship was recent, applied sometime between 2017 and 2019. That's when the same user posted again. They're watching the watchers. If you save these coordinates, make copies. They've already tried to scrub them once. Then the account went dark. No more posts. When moderators tried to reach out, the account showed as deleted. The paranoia spread fast. Users began reporting strange occurrences. One person claimed their IP address was logged and flagged after downloading the satellite images. Another said they received a phone call from an unknown number, just breathing on the other end. A small YouTube channel that analyzed the images had their entire account terminated for violating community guidelines, despite having no previous strikes. But the coordinates survived, copied and shared across dozens of platforms. TikTok users started making videos, dramatic narrations over footage of misty forests. Some showed themselves packing gear, claiming they were going to find it. Most never posted follow-up videos. Then came the expedition reports. A post on a survivalist forum described reaching the approximate area in summer 2020. The user, _Raven, said their GPS started malfunctioning within half a mile of the coordinates. The device would show their location jumping erratically, sometimes placing them miles away, then snapping back. Compass readings spun slowly in circles. They described finding tire tracks from heavy vehicles in places where no roads existed on any map. Fresh tracks with tread patterns suggesting military-grade transport. They also found survey markers, small orange flags tied to stakes driven into the ground, forming a perimeter. When they tried to cross the marker line, one member of their group collapsed with severe vertigo and nausea. They retreated. Another report came from a drone operator who flew equipment over the area in early 2021. The drone made it about 200 feet past the tree line before its signal cut out completely. When they manually recovered it hours later, the SD card was wiped, not corrupted, formatted clean, as if someone had accessed it remotely. The most detailed account came from a former geology student named Sarah Chen, posted in late 2021. She and 3 friends had hiked into the area equipped with EMF detectors, ground-penetrating radar, and radiation sensors. They never found the hole itself, but they found something else. About a mile from the coordinates, they discovered a chain-link fence hidden behind vegetation. It was new, the metal still shiny without rust. Beyond it, they could see cleared paths and what looked like ventilation shafts emerging from the ground, disguised with camouflage netting. Their EMF detectors went haywire, registering readings that suggested powerful electrical equipment operating underground. When they tried to take photos, all 3 of their phones simultaneously shut down and wouldn't restart until they'd hiked 2 miles away. Sarah's final words in the post were chilling. Whatever's out there, they're not hiding it anymore. They're protecting it, and they're expanding it. Then, in 2023, one group decided they weren't just going to search for the hole. They were going to look inside it. The descent into the unknown. They called themselves the Abyss Project. 5 people who'd spent years chasing mysteries, but this time, they weren't amateurs. Marcus Chen was a former aerospace engineer who'd worked on deep-sea submersibles. Rachel Voss had spent a decade as a documentary producer specializing in geological anomalies. The other 3, David Kumar, Lisa Tran, and James Rodriguez, brought expertise in drone technology, thermal imaging, and data analysis. They'd been planning the expedition for 8 months, studying every report, every rumor, every fragmented account from previous attempts. They knew about the GPS malfunctions, the vertigo, the equipment failures. They prepared for all of it. Marcus had spent $40,000 of his own money building a custom drone specifically for this mission. The rig was extraordinary. Built around a titanium frame, it could withstand pressures equivalent to 20,000 feet underwater. The camera system used military-grade low-light optics, designed for cave exploration in complete darkness. Thermal sensors could detect temperature variations within hundredths of a degree. The tether was aerospace-grade cable, designed to handle extreme tension without fraying. They reached the site on October 14, 2023, hiking in under cover of early morning fog. They'd approached from the north, avoiding the southern route where Sarah Chen had reported the fence and ventilation shafts. No one stopped them. No black SUVs. No men with radios. Just silence and the weight of pine-scented air. They found the clearing exactly where the coordinates indicated. David later described it as geologically impossible. The ground simply stopped, not crumbled or eroded, but terminated in a perfect circle. The hole sat in the center, roughly 4 feet in diameter, ringed with stones that looked ancient and deliberately placed. They set up at dawn. Lisa established a perimeter with radiation detectors and EMF sensors. Rachel positioned 3 cameras to document from multiple angles. Marcus and James assembled the winch system, triple-checking every connection. No live stream, no social media. If something went wrong, they wanted the footage preserved. The drone descended at 6:47 a.m. The winch motor hummed steadily as the tether spooled out, the drone's lights becoming smaller, then vanishing entirely. Marcus monitored the feed on a ruggedized tablet. For the first 150 feet, everything appeared normal. Smooth stone walls, slightly damp, consistent with what you'd expect in a natural shaft. Then the walls changed texture. At 200 feet, they became almost glassy, reflecting the drone's lights in ways that seemed wrong. The reflection didn't bounce back directly, but scattered at odd angles, creating phantom images that made depth perception impossible. James noted that the magnetic readings began fluctuating, small variations that suggested metallic deposits in the rock. The temperature drop started at 280 feet, sudden and severe, plummeting from 52 degrees Fahrenheit to 12 degrees Fahrenheit in less than 50 feet of descent. Lisa's instruments showed no air movement, no draft that would explain such rapid cooling. The air should have been warming at that depth, not freezing. At 340 feet, the first pulse of light appeared, not from the drone, from below. A soft bioluminescent glow that pulsed once, then darkness, then pulsed again 7 seconds later. Rhythmic, deliberate, like something breathing in the deep. Rachel whispered, "Are we recording this?" Marcus nodded, his eyes fixed on the screen. They were recording everything. They just didn't know yet that they'd captured something that would make them wish they'd never looked. What the camera saw. The drone made it to 620 feet. before everything went wrong. Marcus saved the data stream in real time, recording directly to 3 separate hard drives as a precaution. When they reviewed the footage later that night in their motel room 40 miles away, they discovered the broadcast had captured things the live feed hadn't shown clearly. The bioluminescent pulses weren't random. When slowed to quarter speed, the lights formed patterns, geometric shapes that appeared for milliseconds before dissolving, hexagons nested within circles, lines radiating from a central point that kept shifting position. Rachel, who had a background in ancient symbology, said they reminded her of Sumerian star charts, but inverted, as if depicting a sky from somewhere else. The temperature anomaly proved even stranger upon review. The sensors showed the drop happened in layers. Every 50 feet, the temperature would plummet another 10 degrees, then stabilize briefly before dropping again. This created distinct thermal zones stacked on top of each other, something that violates basic thermodynamics. Heat doesn't organize itself into discrete layers like that. Not naturally, but it was the audio that disturbed them most. During the live descent, they'd heard nothing but the drone's motors and the whisper of cable. The microphones picked up something else entirely. David isolated the audio track and ran it through spectral analysis software used by cryptographers. What emerged made no sense. Low-frequency vibrations forming word-like patterns. Not English, not any language they recognized, but structured communication nonetheless. The syllables repeated in sequences. 3 sounds, pause, 7 sounds, pause, 3 again. Rachel recorded herself attempting to reproduce the sounds phonetically. When she played it back, every device in the room glitched simultaneously. Her laptop screen flickered. Marcus's phone rebooted. The motel television turned on by itself, displaying only static. They never tried playing it again. The shape appeared at 582 feet. Marcus zoomed in on the frames immediately before the blackout. What they saw defied explanation. It wasn't shadow or blur. It was a figure, definitely a figure, standing vertically on the wall, as if gravity meant nothing to it. Tall, at least 9 feet, if the drone's measurements were accurate. Impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long, too many joints. But it was the way it moved that haunted them. Not smooth motion, but stuttering, appearing in slightly different positions frame by frame, as if it existed outside normal time and was only partially visible in their dimension. James enhanced the image using software designed for deep space telescope photography. The figure had texture, something like skin, but crystalline, reflective, and eyes, multiple sets, arranged asymmetrically, each one catching the drone's light and reflecting it back in a spectrum that shouldn't exist. Colors that weren't colors, hues that made their brains ache trying to process them. In the final frame before the feed died, the figure was closer, much closer. It had moved 30 feet in the span of a single frame, covering the distance instantaneously. One of its 2 long arms extended toward the camera, and in the blur of motion, they could see something on its palm. Not a hand exactly, but an opening, a mouth, or something that served the same function. Then, black, total signal loss. When they recovered the drone 2 days later, using a backup retrieval system, they found it 200 feet down, not 620. The housing was cracked, the internal components fused as if exposed to extreme heat, though the exterior was covered in frost. The SD card was missing, not damaged or corrupted, surgically removed. Someone, or something, had taken it. They uploaded the footage from their backup drives to a private server that night. By morning, everything changed. The erased secrets. Everything changed after the video went public, not with noise and chaos, but with a deep, cold silence that felt unnatural. Theories flooded the internet, then suddenly slowed. The expedition team, the ones who dropped the camera into Mel's hole and captured the blinking shadow.
Bottomless pit said to be a pathway to the paranormal. Como4's Denise Whitaker heads east in search of the hole.
Went offline. Completely. Their accounts disappeared. Locked, deleted, or abandoned. People who tried to contact them got no response. Phone calls went unanswered. Messages bounced back. One day, they were there. The next, nothing. The video stayed online, but the sources sharing it were taken down. Not all at once. One by one. Quiet removals. Vague copyright strikes from hosting platforms, even though no copyright had ever been registered. Private messages circulated about people being contacted, told to remove the footage or face consequences. Servers crashed. Drives failed. Forum threads vanished without warnings. And somehow, no one in any official capacity seemed willing to acknowledge that anything unusual had happened. Then the land was locked down. The area near Manistash Ridge was suddenly fenced off. Satellite maps blurred it out again. Hikers passing near the zone reported black SUVs parked at odd angles. Unmarked trucks hidden between trees. Unfamiliar men with radios patrolling the perimeter. No park rangers. No Forest Service officials. No public statements. People were simply turned away. No one offered reasons why. There were no news stories. No press interviews. No coverage at all. If anyone asked questions, they didn't ask twice. It was as if the world had agreed, without saying a word, that whatever lived in that hole, or whatever watched from within it, didn't belong in headlines or morning shows. It belonged underground, forgotten. And just like that, Mel Waters was gone again. After his brief reappearance in 2002, when he spoke of memory gaps, scars, and a second hole in Nevada, Mel never contacted anyone publicly again. Not long before he disappeared, he hinted at a third hole, somewhere secret, possibly outside the United States. He said what had been found in Washington and Nevada was only part of something much larger, much older, and far more dangerous than anyone knew. He never got to finish that thought. People tried to trace him. No records, no passport logs, no legal documents. His name was scrubbed from property records, just like after his first disappearance. His house sat empty. His trail went cold. No one knows if he left by choice or by force. But it's certain that Mel was removed. Just like the video. Just like the land. Not lost. Erased. Maybe that's what this whole thing was about. Covering up not just a hole in the ground, but what the hole represents. The footage showed more than blinking shadows and strange temperature drops. It revealed an idea. The hole isn't just deep, it's aware. It watches. It responds. And if that's true, then maybe the real question isn't what's at the bottom of Mel's hole. Maybe it's what happens when the hole decides it doesn't want to stay hidden anymore. The hole isn't just deep, it's aware. It watches. It responds. And maybe the real question is, what happens if there are more holes like this, waiting to be found? Share your thoughts in the comments below.